Well, that didn't take long. The British media trying to tell you that all of those stabbings and the burnings of businesses in the UK are just peaceful protests. I'm having Black Lives Matter protest flashbacks. Here's the BBC describing how these violent mobs are just largely peaceful.
But nonetheless, hundreds of people turned up, many of them wearing masks, some of them carrying weapons, as you saw. It was a largely peaceful demonstration. I was there for several hours, but then a group of masked youths began behaving in sort of low-level criminal behaviour, reckless driving, antisocial behaviour. What's happened in the past hour or so is that they've broken off, and a group of them have attacked cars and a pub elsewhere in the city.
And then watch as Sky News had to cut away as a group of masked Muslim men carrying machetes surrounds a Sky News reporter. Watch.
Community leaders have been speaking to the police as well because...
Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Fuck Idi Amin!
But I think, apologies for the language you're hearing, but a sense of the anger I think you can hear there.
Yeah, Katie, I think Becky, I apologise. We need to leave you there, and Becky, we'll have security there, and we will leave that, and I apologise once again for the language there. Our political...
And just a few minutes ago, we got an update from the police in Britain now that they are adding an additional couple thousand riot police as their fears, according to the Telegraph, that far right-wing thugs are going to attack other migrant centers across Britain. Far right-wing thugs. But it does get worse because overnight the British government, under Keir Starmer, has made its first arrest of someone who wasn't even there, wasn't even at the protests. No, this person posted something on social media. So remember, this is how we told you this was going to come together, the censorship industrial complex. This was a move to try to take away your civil liberties. If you post something on social media, the police will come knocking at your door. Get ready for it. Ralph Schoellhammer is an academic researcher. He's been following this very closely, and I bet he has a few things to say about it, and we wanted to talk with Ralph about this today. Ralph, good to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Clay, thanks for having me in these troublesome times.
It's unbelievable what's happening. So a lot of moving pieces in the UK right now. I can't help but in the United States feel that this is about to come to the United States. You have a government that's saying, hey, if you post things on social media that could be rabble-rousing, could incite violence, the police will come knock at your door, and that's exactly what's happened. First on that piece, Ralph, what's your take?
Well, I think we now live in the age of, well, the kill the messenger is the approach by the government. I mean, I'm a little bit befuddled, but I think you hear in the media about who is supposedly inciting those riots and violence. I mean, we can go back up until the 1960s. There have been warnings for 60 years that mass migration is going to lead to this. We had Ross Perot in the United States. We had Enoch Powell in the UK. We had Jörg Haider in Austria. We had the Le Pens, like the eldest, the late Le Pen as well, warning for the same thing in France. Basically, every country had at least one or two figures who were warning of this. And they were mocked. They were called alarmists. Mark Stein, for example, wrote in the 2000s about this. And they, oh, you were alarmist. And no, this is all going to be fantastic in a couple of years. And the late Christopher Hitchens said, Western civilization is so seductive that these people will just integrate within a generation. We see now that that is not happening. And the patience of the British people has worn thin. This is something that was absolutely to be expected. Now, this is not a justification of, looting and burning down somebody's store. But we can go back. We have polls for over 30 years, almost 40 years, that say we want less migration. We want particularly less migration from non-Western backgrounds and from the Muslim world. And governments, Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, everybody, Angela Merkel, so this is also true in continental Europe, everybody ignored it. And now the bill is coming due. And what are they doing? They say, oh, we need to infringe on those who want to talk about it. I mean, the Financial Times, I think with Edward Lutz, who's like a columnist for the Financial Times, had this absolute insane tweet of saying, Elon Musk is a threat to democracy because he allows people to show videos that otherwise we would not see. We would have no idea what's going on in the UK if Jack Dorsey would still be in charge of Twitter. I have my issues with Elon Musk on many areas. But in this case, we are lucky that he took over Twitter or X or whatever he wants to call it now.
Absolutely. The fact that we can actually see videos of what's happening with these machete-wielding individuals going around. The mainstream media is telling us, I just showed you clips of the BBC, telling us that they're largely peaceful protests. These are largely peaceful. And you have Sky News literally cutting away from their broadcast as suddenly these individuals show up and surround this reporter. And that's happened in other videos as well. They've had to cut away from their... So the media is trying to hide this, Ralph. And the only way that we even see this is thanks to X.
Yeah, you're right. And I want to say something as well, because there's this idea that it's kind of violence on both sides. This kind of, it's an equal thing on both sides. But I want to say something that I believe that many people intuitively feel, but are afraid to say it out loud. So I'm just going to ahead and say it out loud. If you come to another country, the expectation is that you respect the values, the customs, the expected behavior of the country you move to, and not the other way around. So no, right? There is no right to go there, as you just mentioned, and then run around and yield a machete or something like this. And no, Britain is not a Muslim country. Britain might be tolerant towards the concept of other religions, but in essence, it is not. And the same is true in continental Europe. It's a decision of the people who have been living there for generations, who've built up those countries for generations, that they decide to tolerate people with different beliefs. And if they abuse that tolerance, then one has to consider what to do about it. By the way, the same in Germany, the same in Austria, the same in the UK. It cannot be that somebody who came across the border 5 minutes ago has the same rights, but none of the obligations that people have whose ancestors died and fought in wars, who sacrificed for the countries that they're living in. I think it's entirely unfair to act as if a country is just the present tense and it just exists in the here and now. A country is a social contract between the dead, the living, and those who are yet to be born. And I think this is something that people justifiably feel is being violated. And this is why they're angry. And while I don't agree with all the actions, I can understand the anger.
Well said, well said. You said something else on Twitter the other day that I thought was appropriate as well. You said there's a willful blindness and delusions of the elite class. These the wealthy elite class that is maybe willfully blind about it. But I would actually, I want to see if go a little further on that. When you have someone like George Soros and you have these billionaire class, this elite class, these unelected globalists who've been driving this thing, it seems like more than just willful blindness, it really is a plan. This is a plan of action to bring in millions of illegal migrants into these communities to fundamentally reshape and change these countries. And as you pointed out, all you needed to do was walk down the streets of Paris, walk down the streets of London to see that this is happening right before our eyes. It was only a matter of time.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And the worst thing that's going to happen is, and you alluded to this at the beginning of today's show, is they will use the crisis that they caused to clamp down on free speech, on civil liberties, and on the dissemination of information. And we see this. Konstantin Kisin, a couple of months back, did an interview with John Anderson, the former Prime Minister of Australia. And there's this great scene where Kisin says, in Russia, around 300 people were visited by the police for a social media post. In the UK, it was 3,500. So many clips that we see now on the internet, because luckily people start filming that, they come to your house and say, you posted something on Facebook that the government doesn't like. How much more dystopian does it get? So as you say, so you had the grooming gangs, the basically child rape gangs in Rotherham that went on for almost a decade with nobody being arrested, with nobody being investigated, because the police, as the official report by the British government said, they were afraid of being called racist. But at the same time, if you post something on Facebook, 3 coppers are going to show up at your door. And this is, by the way, this is the UK, which I think for a long time, justifiably so, was the motherland of parliamentarism and of modern democracy, but no longer. You can live off the social capital of the past for a while, but at some point it's going to be depleted. And I think that Britain is very close to that stage.
Jim Ferguson yesterday on our show basically pointed out this 2-tiered system, right? This 2-tier Keir-Starmer system, as it's being labeled, right? And I think you bring up a great point here. So on the one hand, one tier is that rapists are allowed to walk around with machetes, grab young women off the street, and the police are worried about being called racist if they arrest these individuals. And then on the other hand, you have cops showing up at your door and they will arrest you if you post something on social media that's critical of these rapists carrying machetes. Like what sort of a weird world are we living in right now, Ralph?
No, you're right. And it's not just the UK. I mean, I can give you example after example after example. We had a case in Austria where a teenage girl was gang raped by migrants, but they were arrested, but they were not put in jail. They were all put on probation. So now the girl had to leave the area she lived in because she saw these guys all the time. We have the case in Germany where a refugee family, it's like 13 people, they alone are responsible for 110 crimes. They came as refugees. And people ask, wait, you come to my country, you ask for asylum, you ask for my help, and then you come here and commit crimes in exorbitant numbers. I'm usually not too much of an emotional person, but this is such an injustice. It is so unfair. And now to clamp down, to punish those who point that out, it's Orwellian, it's dystopian, it's all these terms that sometimes seem like hyperbole, now seem that they cannot describe enough how bad it is. And the worst is that the media goes along with it. We feel like Redacted is one of the glorious exceptions. Thank God for the internet. But most of the mainstream media goes along with it. They participate in the lie. So I no longer understand where's the difference between the quote unquote free media today and the state media during the Soviet Union. It's just like it's a lie. The people know it's a lie. The journalists know it's a lie, but everybody pretends as if it is the truth. It reminds me of this one sentence out of George Orwell's 1984, right, where he said the most important decree by the party was that you have to distrust what you see with your own eyes and ears. Because that's the ultimate test, let's put it this way, of a wannabe totalitarian system. You see the sky is blue, but they say, no, it's green. And if you say it isn't, you're in trouble. So you start to play along with the lie because you're terrified of the state. And this brings me, since you're in the United States, right, to the very essence of what, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what Thomas Jefferson said. Right, if people have to fear the government, it's a tyranny. Only if the government has to fear the people, it's a democracy, or a republic, if you want to use that term. And this is the situation we are in at the moment. In the United Kingdom, in Germany, in Austria, in France, in Canada, and growingly in the United States, I believe, if Trump is not going to win in the fall, you will have to be terrified of speaking your mind. And the irony of all of this is, you know who's behind all of this? Everybody who constantly says that the other side is a threat to democracy. No. Every time you hear a journalist, a politician talking about who is a threat to democracy, they are. It's projection on a global scale.
Right. Very well said. Brilliant. And Thomas Jefferson, of course, if the government ends up not being able to fear its people and the people fear its government, it's time to throw off the shackles of that government and create a new government. We could be looking at revolution here. These tipping point moments, these tinderbox moments where you have the stabbing of these 4 children at this dance studio and people are saying enough is enough. We could really be sitting on a revolutionary moment right now in 2024. Ralph, great to see you as always. Brilliant stuff. Follow Ralph on X because you get more of his great musings over there on a platform where you're at least allowed to speak your mind. Ralph, great to see you as always. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Clay.